In this video, I'll show you how I assembled the Morgul Blade. I 3D printed the Morgul Blade. Compared to the sword I 3D printed, this one I had to create support. Before I can even sand the Morgul Blade, I had to remove those support items from the blade so I can proceed to the sanding. With this 3D print, I was able to get the fine printing line, so I was able to start the sanding process from the 120 grit, and then after that I proceeded to the 220 grit, and then I was able to finalize the whole sanding part at 400 grit for all the elements for the Morgul Blade. I then used some adhesive epoxy to connect all the Morgul Blade pieces, so I placed it all in the holes, on the pieces of the connectors as well, to help get a strong bonding adhesion to the piece. And once all that has been done, I was able to use some painter's tape to keep the pieces in place to make sure they don't move out of their position. And then after that, I had to leave it for a good 24 hours for curing time before I can proceed to the next step. Once the curing time has been completed, I then removed all the painter's tape, and I was able to start sanding down all the residue that was in excess on the Morgul Blade. I then went and sanded down all the excess epoxy before I can proceed to the next step of doing the Bondo. And with the sanding, I use the same step of from 120 grit to 220 grit and to 400 grit. To make sure that I don't see any seams of all the individual pieces that was connecting the blade, I went ahead and added some Bondo elements to all those areas there to make sure it's all hidden. Once the Bondo was dried, I went ahead and started sanding down the excess Bondo to the 3D print before I can proceed to the next step of using filler primer. But before I can do that, I made sure I used from 120 to 220 grit and 400 grit sandpaper. After I did the filler primer, I then went ahead and started sanding down the filler primer to the 3D print, where I want to make sure I could find any flaws or any areas that needs more Bondo on the blade itself, as the filler primer does reveal areas of the blade that could have little areas that you need to put more Bondo to help make sure it looks more smoother and all that as well. Also to give a proper adhesion when I re-put some more Bondo to the blade as well. Once the sanding has been completed, I went ahead and add more Bondo to those areas that needed some Bondo, and at the seams as well, to make the blade more unified and more smoother, to look like it was a one blade without seeing those seams area. So as a Bondo was drying, I went ahead with my Dremel with a fine stone bit to re-bring back some details. The reason is as I did all the sanding previously, I worn out a lot of those details of the 3D print. So I went ahead and re-bring back those details into view before I do a final sanding, and I did a final filler primer in place as well. I then went and did the final sanding of all the Bondo areas from 120 to 220 to 400 sandpaper grit before I went to do the final filler primer coating on the whole Morgul Blade. After all the sanding and dremeling details I wanted to put in place, I went ahead and put the final coating of the filler primer on the whole Morgul Blade, so it will be ready for the next step of painting it.